Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Deep Canvassing While Social Distancing webinar. My name is Raquel Jackson-Stone. I am a Senior Training Associate here at Indivisible. I want to go ahead and get us started. And I want to start with some group norms that we'll be observing during this webinar. First, everyone is muted with their cameras off. There will be a chance for y'all to participate in the exercise and speak to each other. But even then, we encourage everyone to stay muted so that everyone can be heard and there's not too much background noise. We have saved time for questions at the end. Whenever you have a question throughout the webinar, please type it in the chat box set to everyone so everyone can read it. When you're writing your question, please write the word question in all caps before your question. This will help our staff grab your questions. And if one of our staff could moderate what this question looks like in the chat, or model rather, what this looks like in the chat box, I'd be very appreciative. You will be receiving a recording of this webinar as well as all of the questions that we answer today and a bunch of materials that you can use moving forward. We won't have time to reference these today, but these will be really, really helpful for you as you go out and deep canvas or stay inside and deep canvas, depending on when we're allowed to go outside again. These are things like how to write your canvassing scripts that will be really, really helpful when you and your Indivisible group actually start having those really deep conversations. And all that will be sent around in an email after this webinar. I am very, very excited today because we are joined by Carlos and Estonella from Youth on Board. Youth on Board is a group based out of Boston that grounds their organizing work in listening, healing, and countering the burnout that stops so many of us from continuing to organize. Their approach to deep canvassing falls right in line with the way that we want to build our Indivisible movements. It's connecting with people and building strong relationships with people who actually want to make a change in their community. I'd love to see from folks who are participating, either raise your hand or give a thumbs up if relationships are important or have been important to you through your organizing. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of raised hands. For a lot of us, I know I'll speak for myself, the relationships that I make with people while I'm here are the reason why I keep coming back, or the reason why I keep throwing down with the same people. And this is really how we build our base. This is really how we build up a strong group that can just increase our capacity and our impact in the community. But deep canvassing is much different than the traditional canvassing that you would do maybe with the get out the vote canvas, for example. We want to actually get people talking for 25, 30 minutes so we can really listen and learn what it is that they care about. You know, like what values are really important to them and sort of drive their life. The danger, of course, of calling random people is that you might end up talking to someone that you really disagree with. And especially now when people are at home, they're very, very willing to talk to someone who will listen. And though that's really, really hard sometimes to push through that emotional burden, push against every fiber of your being to listen to someone that you disagree with, it's important for us to learn what they really feel, what they really care about, and think of ways that we can use those real values, that real nugget to get them involved in our movement. So the tools that Youth on Board will share with us will help you get through these tough conversations. This is the approach to how to have these conversations, as well as group activities to unpack the harm and just ickiness that you feel from talking to someone who you really vehemently disagree with on some visceral, just basic levels. But before we get into that approach, I want to hand it over to Andrew, the Senior Manager for Data for Tools and Network Support at Indivisible. Sorry for messing up your title. He's going to talk about some of the tools you can use to set up these deep canvases over the phone. Again, the materials we will send around will be really helpful when you actually start to do them with your groups. And what we're talking about now is the approach and sort of the practice behind it. So I'll give it away to Andrew to talk about our tools.
Hi, thank you very much. Can everyone hear me? Raquel, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to just hop in for just a second and let folks know that we do have a tool available that should allow you to talk to voters using the skills that you're going to develop during this webinar. That is called My Voters, otherwise known as the VAN. The VAN allows you to create phone banks and hopefully eventually canvases so that you go talk to voters strategically and have those conversations. The VAN is based off of the voter file, and so you can talk to folks based off of a bunch of criteria using the scripts and the skills that you'll talk about in just a bit. If you're interested in using the VAN for phone banks and eventually for canvassing using these skills, reach out to your organizer if you are a group leader. If you're a group member, have some conversations with your group leaders and then have your group leader reach out to the organizer in your state. Without further ado, I want to pass it over to Carlos and Esty to get started.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I'm going to kick it off to my colleague Estaniola to get us started.
So welcome everyone to our webinar. Thank you Indivisible for inviting us. I am Estaniola Harbor, Director of Development at Youth on Board, and Carlos is partner in crime for the Listening Works project. And my background is primarily in youth organizing, and I'm very passionate about education and racial justice. On to you, Carlos.
In the next slide, you'll see a really, really fun picture of the two of us doing our work together. Thank you all so much for having us on today. My name is Carlos. I have the honor of serving as the Director of Listening Works at Youth on Board. I started organizing like Estaniola when I was 14 or 15 and have been in this game for the last 11 years. And Youth on Board has also been my home for all of those 11 years. So Esti's going to tell us a little bit more about Youth on Board, and you'll get to see some of Youth on Board in the next slide.
Thank you. So the Youth on Board, we were founded in 1994, and we literally did what our title implied. We placed youth in positions of power at boards and organizations and corporations that served young people. And then from there evolved to making sure that young people were at the center of all decisions that impacted their lives. So we grew, and the primary projects that we started to work on related to climate change, anti-climate change, protecting the rights of students in schools, and also improving school cultures. Our primary form of work is in Boston, where we're based. We partner with the Boston Public School District to lead a district-wide council of about 60 students who represent 18,000 high school students that organize that are grassroots organizing on behalf of those students, and at the same time are political representatives of them at local school boards. We realized very long ago that if you're going to organize primarily young people of color who are low income, who are up against a lot in their home lives, you can't expect them to advocate for others without figuring out how to support them in advocating for themselves. So a huge component about Youth on Board and our success, as Carlos said, he's been there for 11 years, I've been there for 12. There's a lot of us stay in the organization because we're really adamant about building in social and emotional support, carving out space for young people to really express the full range of their feelings about the things that they're up against, adultism, school, home life. And what we found was when people got a chance to really be listened to and to vent, they were much more resilient and thought a lot smarter about how to lead not only their peers, but adults as well. So through the council in Boston, we tend to incubate a lot of our work, including this model, and I'm sorry, it's called the Action and Support Model. And then through Listening Works, we scaled it on a national level, which is basically our model of doing things. How do we incubate it small and then scale on a bigger level? So Carlos will tell you a little bit about Listening Works.
Thank you, Esti. As Youth on Board, we are also an organization that helps prepare both young people and adults to work intergenerationally. And one of the things we realized a little bit after we started the organization 25 years ago was that these tools that we have at our disposal through our action and support model, which again is about not only taking direct action to change the systems around us as young people, but also support to be able to wrap ourselves around the young people and support them individually as people. We realize that adults are just as in need of support, being listened to, and we're missing some tools and some skills and strategies for how to build really supportive cultures and organizing teams. And so when we took Listening Works nationally in 2016, our goal was to support organizers, movement builders, and activists of all ages, of all different identities, to use some of the work that we had developed over 25 years for themselves, whether it was about supporting their organization, addressing conflict, preventing burnout of leadership and membership, or whether it was about addressing the splintering that we see in our movements, especially today. We wanted Listening Works to be a resource and a support framework and system for organizers just like you. And so we're so excited to be here with you today. On the next slide, you'll see a little bit about what we're planning to do today. Because if you're anything like me and Esty, this time might feel a little funky and a little weird for you. We're all sort of at home. Some of us might be going a little stir crazy. And as organizers, we already feel isolated in the work we try to do, and this is definitely not making it any easier for us. And so we hope that this training prepares you to use some essential skills, some tools, and some perspectives that will help you practice deep listening and effective communication, whether you are in deep canvassing, whether you are phone banking through the tools that Andrew talked about, or whether it's in your organizing team at Indivisible, or even in your life. And so we started the training with some history and context. We're gonna start by looking at listening in action. What is deep canvassing? How is it used? And then we're gonna practice a listening and action skilled. Let's bring it back to the previous slide. A tool that we use for listening and effective communication called the ABC. Then we're gonna look at tools that help us listen. We're gonna talk through the grounding principles that anchor Listening Works and the work that we do. And then we're gonna look at and actually get to try and practice a tool called listening partnerships. And at the end, as Raquel mentioned, we'll have plenty of time for questions. So let's get started with the first part of our agenda, which is looking at deep canvassing and the ABC. I'm talking to a group of organizers from activists from Indivisible, so I'm confident that almost 100% of you have canvassed at some point in your lives. So if you're wondering, what is the difference between traditional canvassing, deep canvassing? Here it is. On the next slide, I want to tell you a little bit about what deep canvassing is, where it comes from, what it is. Raquel, if you click it a couple times, the other boxes will appear. Thank you. 2 more times, I think. There we go. So deep canvassing, let's back it up 1. So what is deep canvassing? Deep canvassing is door-to-door engagement that centers a 2-way conversation, right? If you are like us and you've done traditional canvassing, you might recognize some of this, but in deep canvassing, the emphasis on, can we have a 2-way conversation about the real experiences that shape a person's thinking and ideas? And this model was developed by Dave Flesher and his team at the Leadership Lab out of the Los Angeles LGBTQ Center. They developed a framework that allowed us to go beyond traditional canvassing to answer some questions like, how do we build true and long-lasting relationships with people? How do we canvass people about especially controversial topics, right? Topics like abortion, topics like transgender rights, things that require deeper relationships and deeper listening in order to get through people. And so we know now that deep canvassing is proven by research to be more effective than traditional canvassing in helping to unroot deep bias in communities over the long term. And so in the next slide, we're just going to summarize some of the key differences between traditional canvassing and deep canvassing. Traditional canvassing, as many of you know, usually tend to be short term, right? Canvassing leading up to an election tends to start a few months, maybe a year before the election. We would consider that short term. The goal of a traditional Canvas is usually, not always, but usually narrow and singular. We want to get a particular candidate elected, or we want to push a particular issue on an electorate or group of voters. To do that, we have to have conversations that are substantial enough, but not too long. And so usually traditional Canvas conversations happen anywhere between 2 and 5 minutes. And then the training is pretty quick. If you've ever dropped into a campaign site for a Canvas training, happens pretty quick. Here's the script, here's the basics of it, here's the clipboard materials, maybe we'll practice it once, and off you go. And because we're trying to win a short-term goal, the emphasis is usually on quantity versus quality. Meaning when we look at traditional canvassing, we're usually emphasizing the number of doors and the number of conversations you have. With deep canvassing, this is a long-term strategy for building relationships and political power. We're talking a year plus of dedicated deep canvassing work in order to have two-way dialogues with members of your communities. And these conversations are a little longer. Sometimes they can last 10 to 15 minutes, but sometimes they last as much as 30 to 40 minutes. And the training, because this is about deeper listening, requires a much more intensive training. And so the training for a deep canvas is usually between 75 and 90 minutes. And because it's about a quality two-way dialogue, and because these conversations take longer, the emphasis on deep canvassing is not on quantity, but on quality. Can we have quality conversations with people in our communities that helps us build more relationships and eventually long-term political power? And because it's kind of grueling work to do over long periods of time, deep canvassing requires a lot more support of your leaders and volunteers in order to do it. Let's go on
Next
to
slide. All right, so listening action. So a really useful tool in facilitating the conversation in deep canvassing, right? Because not every conversation is easy, especially if you're trying to have long conversations that are prioritizing quality over quantity. The tool is called the ABC. Next slide. And you can keep clicking. You're doing a great job, Raquel, by the way. The ABC is really a tool that helps you figure out how to navigate the conversation to leave the person feeling more open to share, to being more open to hearing your perspective. It's not really about, nope, whine a bit. You're doing great, Raquel, you really are. So where was I? Let me rewind myself back. So yes, it's really an opportunity to create space for the person to feel listened to, for you to share your perspective. And it's not really an opportunity for you to try to win them over. You're trying to build a relationship so eventually they will begin to trust you, or they will trust you when you come to them, I don't know, 6 months later when there's a election and you want them to vote for a particular candidate. So it really is about relationship building. So let me walk you through A and B, and Carlos will then touch on C. So when you're having this conversation, A, it's so important that you affirm something in the conversation that you agree with and that is true, right? So sometimes when we're having a conversation, we want the person to feel so connected that we'll say things like, yeah, I agree that, like children should, not get free lunch in schools. You don't actually believe that, right? So you don't have to agree with that if that's the person says it at the door, right? Find something that you can affirm. Oh, it sounds like you have a lot of hard feelings about that. That's an affirmation, acknowledging the feeling. I agree that X, Y, and Z. You find something that you agree with that's actually genuine so that you can come off as genuine and be genuine in the conversation. Now, when you're having a conversation with a person, right, and you've listened to them, and then you start to reflect on what they're saying, and you say, yeah, I totally agree with X, Y, and Z, but we try to stay away from but, right? It's a terrible way to try to transition into your ideas or into another idea that they just shared, because anything before but is generally a lie. You are really pretty, but, you're really smart, but, so we generally try to stay away from that. It's really hard. It's so much in our language. Instead, use words like and, or transitional phrases that are not aggressive, so the person knows that you are acknowledging and have heard what they're saying and you're now transitioning to what you want to say. And Carlos can explain more about C, which is connect.
And so whether you're practicing this communication tool in a deep canvas at the door, whether you're practicing it on the phone, whether you're practicing it with a partner, I know I do, it's really important to finish this off with connect. And when we talk about connect, what we mean is, what can you share about what you know and what you know to be true from lived experience about the issue that you're trying to talk to the person about, that is going to connect with them, not necessarily through numbers or statistics, but through real lived experience and story. For anybody that studies and understands humans, we know that humans don't really understand the world through numbers or data or statistics. For anyone that's ever tried on this webinar to throw a fact or a statistic at someone that you oppose, you probably got a statistic right back proving something else. And so we know that numbers don't work that well to try to get people to understand our perspective. We know that storytelling does. And so when we talk about connect, you want to think about two things. Do you have any lived experience with the issue or the topic that you're trying to talk to the person about? And what story can you share that might get through to them at a personal level? And if you don't have any lived experience with that particular issue, say that you're canvassing as an ally or phone banking as an ally to undocumented immigrant youth or to people who don't have healthcare, can you share experiences that your loved ones or the people that you care about have that illustrates why that issue is so important to you and what you're trying to get across? We'd love to take any questions. Remember that in the chat box, any questions you might have, you can take, and we'll be able to answer some of them at the end of the training. So now,
next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we've walked you through the ABCs. Still doing a lovely job, Raquel. Thank you so much. We've walked you through the ABCs, and we want to try it out before you model it, right? Oh, we have a question. Would you explain bridge more? Do you want to take a stab at that, Carlos, and then I will?
Sure. I like to think of bridge as one of the simpler ones technically, but maybe a little harder than we think it is. Bridging is once you've been able to listen to the person, right? The point is to try to listen as much as possible. Once you've been able to ask them questions that keep them talking. And once you feel like it's ready or they're ready for you to share an experience, a story, you want to be able to transition the conversation in a way that continues to affirm the person. And so when we, for example, when we say, yes, 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 but, right? Exactly, Karen, yes, and. A bridge is not a but, right? Because if we use the word but, we know that everything that came before the but was a lie. And so you want to bridge effectively, which means continuing to affirm. So we use simple phrases like yes, and. We could almost even use a question like, can I share a story with you that I think you'll want to hear about? Or may I share something that I just thought of as I was listening to you? What's a soft way to get them to agree to listen to you? And that helps you transition to the connective story or the connective narrative.
Thank you. So let's try it out. Carlos and I are going to model the ABCs in the conversation. You have plenty of opportunity to pick out where Carlos, as the canvasser or the person on the phone trying to phone bank me, is using affirm, bridge, and connect. We have three options for the topic at hand. It's immigration reform, universal health care, Green New Deal, and we need your help in determining what will Carlos talk to me about who will be on the other phone. I will not make it easy for him so that you can see the examples, the model, the ABCs exemplified. So we're going to start a poll now, and we need you to vote. Oh, I get to vote too, do I? No, I don't.
Oh, look at the surveys coming in. All right.
I think we have a clear winner.
I think we have a clear winner, universal health care.
Yes.
So thank you for that. We're going to end the poll. Oh, and we're gonna not use that poll. There we go. So what topic is Carlos? And let's say we're not canvassing here. We're actually going to take the deep canvassing tools and use them in a phone conversation. So I'm gonna phone bank on universal healthcare, and I'm in Massachusetts. So I think what I'm going to, and this is not a real issue, we can just sort of, I am phone banking for a Massachusetts state level Medicare for all proposal that would expand coverage to all people in Massachusetts. It might include undocumented immigrants in Massachusetts, which we are known for in our healthcare, and it'll eliminate deductibles and lower costs for most people. So I'm going to take my phone and we're going to do an exercise where we're going to try the ABC. And what I need you as the person phone banking Estaniola is every once in a while, I might ask for your help. I might run out of ideas to affirm, bridge, or connect. Use the chat box. Help me out. Throw me a bone. Help me navigate this conversation. All right. Are we ready to begin?
We are.
All right.
Oh, wait, you got to call me first. Go ahead.
Call you.
Hello?
Hello. Is this Mrs. Harbor?
This is she. Who am I speaking to?
Hi, Ms. Harbor. This is Carlos. I am a volunteer with the Indivisible Network, and we're just checking in on our neighbors while we're all in quarantine. Have you and your family gotten everything you need? Is everything okay?
Yes, we are blessed and highly favored. I'm so glad God has been watching over us.
Well, that's really, really great to hear. I'm so glad that that's the case. Is there anything you might need help with? We have a mutual aid network of support going on in the city, so we're able to help connect people with resources, food support. Is there anything you might need help with?
Not at the moment, but maybe at the end of this call, you could send me the information I could pass along to my community, my church folks.
Okay, that's great. All right. And where do you live specifically?
I live in Mattapan.
Okay, let me just take a note of that. Mrs. Harbor, did you know that Mattapan has been a hotspot for COVID-19?
Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah, what has it been like?
I don't know. I just stay indoors. I just hear things and pray.
Okay, no, I understand. That's a very good idea. I ask that and I say that, Ms. Harbor, because we're also a group that not only supports members in the community, but we have been pushing for a proposal here in Massachusetts to expand the Medicare for All program. Have you heard of Medicare for All or universal health insurance?
Oh God, what does that mean?
Well, Medicare for All is a system in which the government in Massachusetts, the state government, would be responsible for the health insurance of people. And we think that based on other countries that have done this, we think that it could just really increase the access to healthcare in the state. I don't know if you know that there are a lot of people in our state that currently
No, I do not agree. So you're basically saying people will get healthcare for free.
Oh, you don't? Okay, well, what are your thoughts about it?
Is that what you're saying, that people will get healthcare for free?
Well, do you pay taxes, Mrs. Harbor?
Yes, I do pay taxes.
I think that the proposal is really about, can we use our tax money to provide quality healthcare for people? What do you think about that?
No, you know what we could use our tax monies for? Improve our schools, not with this healthcare stuff. I don't want to turn into Canada where I'm hearing that there are lines out the door, people trying to get see their doctor. No, I don't need that. If I have good health insurance, and I just believe that the quality will go down if more people get access. Don't you see what happened in COVID? The healthcare system is overwhelmed. Yes. You know, yes. How much more? So I don't want that to be a norm. So no, I'm good.
Okay, I hear you, Ms. Harbor. I go to Boston Medical Center. Have you ever been to Boston Medical Center?
I go to Brigham's and Women's.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great hospital. My mom and I go to Boston Medical Center, and a month ago, half of her face became really numb and paralyzed, and we took her to Boston Medical Center, and we had to go through the emergency room because my mom has not been able to access affordable health care. Premiums are through the roof. She cannot afford it. And we went to the emergency room, and there were dozens and dozens of people in the emergency room.
I just have a question. You don't look like you're from here. Is your mom from this country?
No, actually, my mom and I are.
You sound like you have an accent, so I'm just wondering.
Yeah, well, we're from Colombia. I was raised here.
So you're a citizen.
I am adjusting my status currently, but my mother.
So you're trying to tell me a story about your mom, who went to the hospital, is not even from here, doesn't even have papers, and I'm supposed to agree that she's supposed to get health care. She should have went back to her country to go get it.
All right, pause. That I'm taking some heat right here. I'm hot. I don't know what to say next. Other people stressed just listening to this. Help me out, y'all. What are some ways that I could affirm something that Estaniola or Ms. Harbor is saying? And what are some ways that I can connect with her? Any ideas out there for ways that I could affirm what she's trying to say? Ways that I could connect? I like that, Anna. I'm gonna ask Estaniola about her background and see what might be there. Well, Mrs. Harbor, you know, I was born and she was born outside of the United States, but so are a lot of people. Were you born here?
I was born out of the States too. I was born in Haiti, worked my way up to in this country, secured my status a legal way.
Yep.
And here I am. I worked hard for what I deserve.
Well, I hear you, and I could not be happier for the success that you have experienced as an immigrant in this country. And I just think that all immigrants work really hard. You know, my mother worked 3 jobs. I'm sure you know what that's like. She worked 3 jobs. She barely got to see us, but she put food on the table every night. She sent us to school. I'm working really hard to support her. And we went through difficult times. It sounds like you may have gone through some rough times yourself. Thank you, Maria. That's a great way.
Yes, I have gone through some rough times. I hear you. But God got me through.
Oh, I'm so glad. And for some reason, me and my mom got through. But, you know, I would love to continue this conversation. I really respect what you have to say. I'm going to send you some information on the Mutual Aid Network.
Okay.
And I'm just going to slip in there a flyer for a webinar that we have coming up in a couple of weeks that is just about learning about this proposal. And you can bring any question you have. You don't have to agree with it. Just come and ask your questions, learn a little bit more about it. So if you want to give the issue a chance, I'll slip it into the email, but I'll also connect you to the Mutual Aid Network.
Hi, thank you very much. God bless you, child.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Harbor. I hope you have a
bye-bye. Those are not my views at all. I'm just kidding.
All right, man. Anna says we figured. All right. Well, that was trial by fire. I mean, that was a small example of how a conversation could have gone on this topic. Yes, I tried to be tough, and I really tried to practice the affirm, bridge, and connect strategy. It is not easy, especially when it's such a personal topic, but it's a really effective way to try to navigate through a conversation. Yeah, Nancy, that was really hard. Could folks use the chat box to maybe say ways that could you identify ways that I affirmed her feeling or was bridged effectively or maybe connected? Would love to see what folks took away. Yep. And so that's tough, right? Like after I hung up the phone, even though this was just a pretend conversation, my blood pressure is a little high, I'm feeling a little hot, I'm feeling a little red. And so these deep conversations that we try to have with people to build relationships, to try to build some kind of connection, even if we can't agree initially, is really tough on organizers, right? We realized from the beginning that for us to do deep phone banking or deep canvassing, we needed to build real support for people that are doing that day in and day out, listening to people. And we needed to figure out ways to be able to support ourselves and each other to not burn out. And we also know that we needed to definitely develop the skill of listening. Some of you might consider yourselves really good listeners. Can I see some hands raised if you consider yourself a good listener? And then I want people to be honest. Raise your hand if you maybe aren't the best listener. You feel like you could actually improve on your listening skills. I know I could still use some improvement on my listening skills. So we're going to transition to the next slide. And this is really about working our way backwards. We talked a little bit about deep canvassing, and then we really got to practice the Affirm, Bridge, Connect tool. But that stuff is hard to do if you don't know how to listen. And if you haven't been able to process the things that might keep you from being able to listen and be able to communicate even in difficult conversations. And so we're going to start with one of our favorite activities, which is looking at the Listening Works guiding principles on the next slide. Oh, let's bring it one slide back. Slide back. So we're going to do a little activity on our grounding principles. And we're doing this activity because, and we have grounding principles because we all carry into this work some beliefs and attitudes about people, right? Some of us grew up in households where we were taught to distrust people, right? Maybe people aren't trustworthy. We grew up in homes where we learned to give up on people. And we learn to stop trying to connect with people or to try to understand where they're coming from. So we got to check those beliefs, those assumptions, those attitudes we bring about people if we're trying to do the heavy, big work of actually meaningfully listening to people. So
and building relationships with them, yeah.
And building deep and trusting relationships with them. So Estaniel is going to walk us through an activity on our grounding principles. We're going to show you 3 grounding principles that really anchor how we do our work. And we're going to ask you for each principle to fill out a poll that asks you whether you agree or disagree with that statement.
Mm-hmm. So once the poll pops up for the first statement, you're going to choose agree, disagree. There is no middle ground, so don't try to find it. It's not there. We're asking you to just decide whether you agree or disagree. And then from there, we'll go on. So our first guiding perspective is all people are good. Go ahead and fill out the poll, though I appreciate the comment.
All people are good.
Okay.
Wow. Great. I love this training because we always get a different set of responses for every training or webinar that we do.
All right, so I think that's it with the poll. We have 63% disagree that all people are good, and we have 37% agree that all people are good. Okay, great. Moving on to the next statement. All people get hurt. I'm seeing some comments. Wow, I'm really surprised by that result from the first statement.
Yeah.
Mm. All people get hurt. Wow, yeah. Okay. I'm seeing that 95% of people agree all people get hurt, and 5% of people disagree that all people get hurt. Excellent. Moving on to our next statement and final statement. All people can heal.
Wow.
All right, we'll close the poll. We have 71% of folks agree and 29% of folks disagree. Thank you so much for participating. So our 3 perspectives, why did we walk you through that? All people are good, all people get hurt, all people can heal. Next slide, please. We could spend an entire training going deeply into why we have based listening works on these 3 principles, but we don't have the time. And I do want to be honest that, at least for myself, I still even grapple with these, but I still hold on to them for the following reasons. We believe that all people are good simply by just looking at the reality. For the most part, we are jubilant about life. We are very loving. We love to be connected. We love to laugh. We love to play. We love to forgive, or we want to forgive, or we want to be forgiven. And where we look at the reason why we think that way is primarily through our work with young people. It's really hard to look at a young person and you pick whatever age you want and say, hey, this person is evil. Particularly look at little babies, right? And so we don't think that just immediately disappears as soon as you become an adult. We just think we grew up and became a lot more discouraged and hurt. And that kind of clouds what is inherently true about us. So we believe that all people get hurt, and we hold that out, that whoever we talk to at the door, whoever we talk to on the phone, comes with a history, whether it's generational or familial, history of hurt. And whether or not we realize it, it shapes our reality. And sometimes we think we are our hurt. So we try to hold that out, that we were born good, we are good. Experiences have happened to us that have hurt us. They have made us, supposedly, or at least we think we do. And so that is why we get triggered by certain things, certain people, and why we come off the way we do to certain people. And then we also just hold out that all people can heal. And I want to preface it with, all people can heal if they know that healing is even an option and they have access to it. So I do want to just say that. And what we mean by all people can heal is that if we lived in a society where we were given a space where feelings were okay to show, right? Where if we were younger and we needed attention, we weren't ignored and actually got to process whatever we were going through at that moment. All these missed opportunities that we had, where we could have just had genuine human connection that could have led us through and be listened to. We firmly believe that all people can heal. And so that's what we mean by all people are good, all people get hurt, all people can heal. It's not prescriptive. We still struggle with ourselves. But why is it important? Because I'm pretty sure Carlos was holding that out when he was having the conversation with me. Even in the example, right? Even when we were playing around, I know Carlos enough to know what buttons I need to push. He is an undocumented man. So I'm sure he was triggered and had to hold out that this is Esty, who he's known for over 10 years. I'm good. I have been hurt and I can heal. So that's why we hold that out.
And even if I didn't know you, and even if this was a conversation that we've had for the first time, I could equally hold out that you might be good, and that we all got hurt, and that shapes how we see the world, and that there's always a possibility for healing. And so, like Esty said, we grapple with these principles all the time. Sometimes it's like, I don't know about that person. I don't know about that individual. But we need these guiding principles, like someone said in the comment, because if you can't believe that people are capable of good, then why are we doing the work that we're doing? We would want to give up. So in the next slide, we invite you to take 1 minute to engage us in an activity, jot down our guiding principles, whether or not you agree with them. All people are good, all people get hurt, all people can heal, or come up with your own. What are your North Stars? In other words, what are your principles that might keep you grounded? So take the next minute to consider that, and let us know in the chat box if there are principles that guide you that you could put into words. Jonathan, I like that a lot. All people have value. We want to see others. What are some principles that keep you doing the work that y'all are doing? I refuse to believe that you do the hard work of the Indivisible Network, thinking that there is no capacity for good and that we can't reach and change people's minds and hearts. Things should be just. I have changed, so all people can change. The golden rule. Great.
I think that all people can change. I can hold that out.
I can hold that out too. what can you hold out that will keep you going in a conversation with someone, in a fight with someone, even in a conversation with a Trump supporter? What principles can you hold on to that will keep you headstrong in your mission to create change and good for this world? Thank you for engaging us in that activity. So these guiding principles, like we said, are really what anchor our work, but they still don't help us listen if we have no idea how to listen. And so in the next section, we're going to walk you through what is meaningful listening, and we're going to show you a tool and a practice that can radically help us develop what I like to call that listening muscle, so we can do it and practice it for other people. Next slide, please.
The next slide. All right, meaningful listening. So I think some of you guys were honest. I don't know how to listen well, or you're constantly being the person who is listened to and don't know how to offer it. So when you're on the phone and you're in your phone banking, when you're deep canvassing, it requires a lot of listening, and it requires a lot of energy from you too. It is a muscle. And so we at Youth on Board, what we figured out is useful to do is to actually be very intentional about building a practice around listening that is not merely just so that we can do the work of listening to someone for a long period of time, but that we could process whatever we need to process so that we can listen for a very long period of time. So it's a healing practice for me just as much as it is for healing for the other person that I'm listening to be heard, right? So I wonder, after Carlos's call with me in that model, he could have just went away and just needed to be listened to because she did a lot of hard listening in my direction. Next slide, please. So we have 3 simple guidelines for listening. We've all been taught how to listen. Generally, it's with active listening with attention with your eyes, but we're all guilty of looking at someone and listening to them or looking to listen to them, and you're thinking about the next thing you have to do or the next sentence you want to say. So it's not only just about eye attention. It's really, eye attention is really about looking like you care about what the person is saying. Generally for me, it's just a matter of just saying this person is worth listening to, and from there I can generally show that I really like them and I'm interested in them. On a phone it's a little harder, so it'll be very useful for you to sound joyous, sound curious about the person who's on the phone. The second thing is to just try to listen, right? Many of us either are interrupters of those who want to be listened to or have been interrupted when we wanted to be listened to, right? Sometimes you wanted to vent and somebody just cut you off and said, here's my advice, and that was it. And you weren't really looking for advice. You were really just looking to be listened to. So we just say, just listen, do not give advice. And avoid taking advice. You have a really brilliant mind. Once you are listened to, I'm pretty sure you can figure out what you need to do next. And then if you are the speaker or the person who is being listened to, well, that should actually say if you're the listener. If you are the listener, we encourage you to ask questions as it makes sense. So if this person has said one sentence, what could you say to get them to talk more about themselves? Not necessarily from a place of where you're just curious or where you want to take up space because you can't stand silence, right? So we encourage you to ask probing questions. Next slide, please.
So all of this does not work if we don't actually make the time to structure it and to actually practice listening, right? Show of hands, if you can use the reaction thumbs up button, or if you want to type it into the chat box. How many of you actually get listened to without interruption once a week? How many of you genuinely have space to be listened to without being interrupted, without someone butting in with advice, without cutting you off and taking over the conversation? Some of us have that, and a lot of us probably don't. All right, let's flip it. How many of you are maybe the friend or the family member that does all the talking, and maybe you don't do such a good job at listening? Anyone have a thumbs up or a hand for that? How many of us actually maybe don't listen as well as maybe we think we should?
How many of us are in denial?
And how many of us are both, depending on context and the person that we're with? And so we know that listening does not happen in our society. I think we think that if more listening happened in our society, things would be a lot different. And so we have to give listening some structure. If we're going to practice it and develop it like a muscle, we need a practice setting, a practice tool. And so that's where listening partnerships come in. Listening partnerships are a simple but revolutionary agreement that you can make with another person, someone you love, a colleague, a friend, and even a stranger, which you will get to do in a few minutes. It's an agreement that you're going to share equal time, both listening and speaking to each other. And here's how you set up a listening partnership. You get in a partnership with one person, sometimes two in a three-way. We'll get to experience that on this webinar. And you decide who's going to speak first, who's going to speak second, and then who's going to speak third if there are three people. You're going to determine that, and then you're going to share equal time amongst each person. When you're listening, like Estaniola said, you want to avoid advice or taking over. But when you're speaking, you want to practice what we call radical vulnerability. Most of us are very comfortable sharing that we're good, or our commute sucked, or the weather's nice, or the weather's crappy. But for the most part, we stay in what Estaniola calls sort of the circle of comfort, or our bubble of comfort. When we ask you to practice radical vulnerability, we ask you to maybe dare to put a foot or even a toe outside of that bubble. What could you share about your lived experience or your life that's a little bit more than you're used to sharing? When the person who's speaking runs out of time, their time to speak and to be listened to is over, the person that is listening should offer what we call a grounding question. And when we say grounding question, we don't mean like, walk them through a yoga meditation necessarily, but we really mean like a silly question or two that will help the person kind of snap out of whatever they were talking about, maybe smile, maybe giggle. I like to ask funny questions like, if you could make a salad with a piece of candy, a vegetable, and I don't know, something silly, like something that you can only buy at 7-Eleven, what would you make? Or name 3 countries that start with the letter L that you want to visit in the next 10 years. You want to ask 1 or 2 questions that sort of gets them back here and not on whatever they were talking about. And the last sort of guideline for how to set up a listening partnership is we have to maintain confidentiality. This all sort of falls apart if you're in a listening partnership with someone and you're saying something that's deeply personal and then they go off and tell someone without your permission. And so whenever we enter into a listening partnership, we always agree to maintain confidentiality. And after the listening partnership is over, if we want to ask the person a question or refer to something they said in their listening partnership, we want to ask for permission to bring it up. And the person gets to say yes or gets to say no. And so in summary, you set up a listening partnership by picking a person or two, splitting equal time amongst each other to be listened to, and then to listen to the other person. When we're listening, avoid advice, don't take over. When you're speaking, try to be a little more vulnerable than usual. Offer a grounding question, a silly question or two at the end of the person's turn, just to get them back to you so that they can then listen to you. And finally, maintain confidentiality.
So because of the size of this group, we will likely be in groups of 3. And when it's your turn, once you guys determine who will speak, I will speak A, I'll be B, speaker C. Speaker A needs to choose out of B and C who will be your primary listener. That means that you're focusing on that person. They are just listening to you. You don't have to speak. So if you are in a setting where you're around people, maybe you should just decide to be the primary listener of the other 2 folks who are not around people so that you can just listen and not have to speak. The person who is not the primary listener in the 3-way, your attention is just as valuable. I mean, most of us are lucky if we just get 1 person to listen to us. How much more if we get 2, right? So go ahead and give your lovely attention to them as well. Anything else, Carlos, before we try this out?
Yes, so we're going to, in a second, we're going to split up into, like Estaniola said, groups of 3 to practice a listening partnership. Pick speaker A, B, and C, take your turns, time for yourselves, and then we'll come back.
Yes.
On the next slide, you will see the prompt for what we want you to talk about in your listening partnership. And next slide, please. So the prompt is at the top of the screen. We want you to use your listening partnership time to look at maybe a guiding principle that you might be grappling with. All people are good, all people get hurt, all people can heal. Which of that are you still grappling with or having a hard time wrapping your head around? In a second, our tech folks are gonna split you all up into random groups of 3. Be aware that you may end up with a group of 2, and you just get to split whatever time we have. I think based on the agenda, we have probably exactly, let's do 9 minutes in these breakout rooms. And so what we want you to do is when you get to those rooms, you're gonna have, whenever you've sort of come together, look at how much time you have left and give yourselves equal time amongst the 3 participants. We're gonna give you a little bit more bumper time, maybe give you 10 minutes in the rooms because you'll wanna transition, someone may want a question. And we know it's hard to cut someone off when their timer has gone off, but find a way, find a pause in their thought, find a place where they maybe have wrapped up a thought, and you just get to say, your time's up. Would you like a grounding question? That might feel a little awkward for us, but it's important that we practice what it's like to take turns, to share equal time, and to make it equitable in terms of listening.
Okay, let's get started. Everybody should at least get 2 minutes once you guys are all settled and have transitioned.
Watch out. It is not 2 months, it is 8 weeks. They're not joking about the difference. So make sure if you used to pay semi-monthly, pay bi-weekly.
Okay, we gotta go on. Thank you.
That was important to a larger national news story. It might be an international news story that I'm seeing. Specifically because of some of the things that prisoners have
Okay, thanks very much for all this info. Quick question. We already submitted an
Mara.
Mara Reinhardt.
Oh, Laura, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was finally able to get. Okay, go ahead.
And now I think you should see this. I will mention once again.
Breaking us to different breakouts. Yeah, we can do it.
I just started doing a thing on Friday afternoons at 4:30 to 5.
Have you muted? I guess.
Hello?
Hi, was that Liz?
Wait a minute. Tonight at 8.
Hi there, this is Olga. Can I help?
Wait a minute.
There we are.
Carlos, you didn't get to finish.
I got cut off in the middle of a listening partnership. That is okay.
Surprised you were able to get us into groups.
Well,
That's interesting technology.
all right, let's wait a couple more seconds to get everybody back. And then if we can get Raquel to put the PowerPoint back on. Thank you all for engaging in that activity. We hope the technology was navigatable enough, and we deeply apologize if you didn't make it into a breakout room, or if you ended up in a breakout room with nobody, or if the person that you were supposed to be in a breakout room didn't want to participate. So, but it sounds like some people had really great experiences.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Great. Raquel, could we bring the PowerPoint back on for the last couple of slides? Thank you so much. Well, we're so happy to see that people are saying that it's a great experience. Go ahead into the chat box and just let us know what was good or surprising about being a speaker or a listener, or maybe what was hard or confusing about being a listener or a speaker. And in the next slide, we want to challenge you to think about, is this a tool that maybe you could use in your personal life or in your work? So if we go to the next slide, we pose a question for you. It's great. I love reading all the comments. How could you use listening partnerships in your work with Indivisible? Can you think of ways that you could incorporate listening partnerships into your team meetings, into your organizing, and maybe even into your direct actions? Esty, do you want to say a little bit about all the ways in which we use listening partnerships to do our work?
Yeah, one of the primary ways that Carlos and I use listening partnerships, we use it at the start of almost every work block we do together. Carlos and I started off like you all doing 2 minutes each, and we've grown because we've built this muscle over time to be able to do 30 minutes each. And what we figured out is by being able to build our bandwidth to listen to each other and be listened to, we're a lot more productive in our work and cranking things out. because all the gunk that was getting in the way of what was on our minds out the way. So that's one way you can incorporate it into your work with a colleague. Other ways is we use it before an action. Actions are really scary, right? During an action, actions are not always perfect. Things pop off that are very triggering. And so we tend to step away and actually do listening partnerships. We re-engage in the action. And of course, afterwards, so I'm sure there are tons of feelings up about the action itself.
One of the ways I love to use listening partnerships, and I'll say, and Estinola knows this very well, I just have to say as a trainer, before any training or webinar, I get so scared. I think everything is gonna go really badly. I think it's gonna be a disaster, and I think nobody's gonna like it. And I know that that has to do with my past experiences and the things that happened to me when I was younger, where it really was a disaster and things didn't go well. And so I always have a listening partnership before a big training, and especially with Estinola, because she knows me and I can really work on those feelings. So by the time I'm in front of you all, I'm way more relaxed. I can think a lot better, and things just go really, really well after I've been able to be listened to and then offer Estinola my listening.
So you can imagine how a listening partnership would then be useful in a deep canvas or in the phone banking process. Am I jumping ahead, Carlos? Is it okay if I talk about this?
No.
Yes. So you can imagine how it would be useful there. For instance, when we were able to deep canvas in person before COVID-19, there was a canvas that we did with some of our young people at Youth on Board, knocking on doors, asking people. It was related to school discipline. It was a question related to school discipline. And we encountered a man who was very lovely, but he basically implied that, not only should they discipline kids, they should beat them, because he beat his kids and they turned out fine. He was beaten, he turned out fine, right? That was hard to hear, especially if you don't agree with that. So what we had to do was step away and have a listening partnership amongst ourselves so that we could be prepared to then listen to the next door, because we had a lot of feelings up. We also use listening partnerships before the deep canvas because people are really scared to even talk to people. And we use it afterwards as a means to debrief, all the things that we encountered during the deep canvas. So you can even do the same thing with phone banking. If you had a hard conversation on the phone or somebody hung up in your face, can you call up somebody to have a quick listening partnership and then re-engage?
So on the next slide, we don't like to use the word homework as youth organizers, so we'll call them a takeaway. We challenge you to walk away from this training, put the timer on, and do a listening partnership with just one person this week. Share equal time and trust that they can handle listening to you. And as always, refrain from advice. So we want to move on to the Q&A section. We want to thank you for being in this training with us. We want to summarize some of our major takeaways in the next slide. We want you to walk away understanding that deep canvassing as a practice and as a strategy can be used at the doors, it can be used on the phones, and it helps us build stronger relationships, and it's proven to help us unroot bias. The ABC tool, Affirm, Bridge, and Connect, is a skill that allows us to both listen and communicate our ideas more effectively, whether it's in canvassing, whether it's in phone banking, and as you heard from Estinola and I, even in our personal lives. Next slide, please. We also want you to know that listening and being listened to is key to doing deep canvassing, phone banking, but also to support yourselves so that you don't burn out. We need you all as activists and organizers out in the field for a long time. We want you to know that our guiding principles as activists, whatever they may be for you, whether it's our guiding principles or your own, help us to listen more effectively because they help us hold on to some idea that there's goodness in people, whether it's inherent or potential. And finally, listening partnerships are a tool and a practice that can help us develop the bandwidth that we need, that muscle, to listen and to be listened to. And these listening partnerships can be incorporated into your team practice, in the streets, or even while you're phone banking. We will make sure to send out all supporting materials for this training, one-pagers on the tools and strategies we talked about, as well as some really neat tools from Indivisible about how to develop your deep canvas script, whether you're on the doors or phone banking. Thank you again so much for being on this training, and I think we have some time for some questions now.
We do indeed. Thank you both, Carlos and Esty, so much for leading us through that. That was fantastic. And so we were able to grab questions from the chat box. So thank you, everyone. Let's see what we've got. So let's see, a clarification question. As a community organizer, I'm quite familiar with one-on-ones. Is what you are describing different in any way? And if so, please note what those differences are between a regular one-on-one and a listening partnership.
Great. Esty, do you want me to take a stab at answering? Great. That's a really great question. One-on-ones, as most of you should know, is a way for us to get to know somebody and to figure out what their desires are, what their needs are, what their vision is, and to figure out how they can plug into our work. I would say that one-on-ones are really informal, and it's also more about, there's not like timing, you're not deciding to share equal time, you're not making an agreement about, if you're talking, I'm not going to interrupt, I'm just going to listen for the time that you're speaking. And then there's not an agreement to switch in that way. I would say that listening partnerships are not so much an organizing tool, but a tool for yourself to develop your ability to listen. And I'll also say that it's a great way to get some support from yourselves. We train lots of organizers and movement builders who can't quite grasp the idea that they should be getting support for the work that they're doing themselves. And I actually cannot imagine doing this work if I didn't have listening partnerships. I think I would have been burnt out, or my life would look like a mess, or I'd be a disaster. Listening partnerships, when you build them with people that you trust and that know how to practice equal time listening, it's just a tool for support for yourself and to build your bandwidth. And as you build your bandwidth for listening, then your one-on-ones will flourish, because you'll actually learn how to listen and not just talk at someone, which, you know, a lot of us, me included, struggle with. We hope that answered your question, and if it didn't, we are happy to follow up with more.
Thank you. So next question. When you do a listening partnership, do you have a specific topic?
So I already answered that question in the chat box, so can we go to the next one?
Oh, thank you so much. You're more on it than I am. Cool. Let's see. One person who's done canvassing in person, wondering how do you keep folks on the phone?
Yep, that is a great question. I think I saw that question too. They also referred maybe to how do you convince someone that you're not a scam? Or how do you convince someone that you are not wanting their money. You may have noticed that when I first picked up or got on the phone with Ms. Harbor, I immediately said my name and who I was with and what I was trying to do. And so just because the phone conversation is meant to build a relationship doesn't mean that we have to be vague or wishy-washy when we first pick up the phone. In fact, it's a better strategy to be very upfront with saying who you are with. And so in the activity, you heard me say, my name is Carlos. I'm a volunteer with the Indivisible Network, and we're checking in on our neighbors during this quarantine. And then shortly thereafter, I offered access to a mutual aid network. That was my attempt at recognizing, folks, that right now under COVID-19, most people aren't at this point thinking about policy change. Even if they support the Green New Deal, even if they support universal healthcare, people are struggling to figure out what is going to happen next month. They're trying to figure out how to put food on the table, and they're trying to figure out if they are going to get the stimulus check. And so we think it's good practice in any canvassing script or phone banking script you're developing right now to really open with checking in on how people are doing. If you are part of an organization or a city that has mutual aid network, consider figuring out promoting it, checking in on the wellness of people. We know some members of the Indivisible Network are doing just that as we speak.
Yeah, and I just wanted to just reiterate that Carlos was very good about asking me a question that got me to talk about myself. How are you doing right now? You know, how is the situation impacting you? the more you can ask questions and get people to talk about themselves, you know, the more you're more inclined to keep them on the phone and still talking.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think we have time for one more question. Given the urgency of the election period, why is deep canvassing important?
Esther, do you want to stab at that?
No, you can. You're like deep canvassing king.
I'm sorry, I got distracted by Kathy's excellent question about deep values and wanting what's best for our children. Let me just quickly answer that because my brain was there. Kathy asked, I've heard that connecting around deep values is a more effective way to reach people. When we talked about the Affirm Bridge Connect and we focused on the connect, Kathy, that's exactly where you want to share a story that illustrates a value that you hold that you think that person might hold too, right? Universal values like family and community and equality and fairness. Now, just because someone holds those values doesn't mean that they are practicing it in their voting or in their policy or in their behavior, but it's a starting point. And so when we talk about how can you connect with the person through lived experience and story sharing, it's exactly about that. How can we tell a story that touches on a universal value that anybody can identify with, even if the story for that person is a little different? In terms of why deep canvassing is so important in 2020, I don't know about you all, we work with a lot of young people and young adults, and a lot of people are discouraged about the 2020 elections. And I know that after the primary was, there was a decisive candidate, I felt burnt out. I didn't want to talk to anybody about politics. I didn't want to talk to anybody about it. And we're finding that deep conversations sometimes are more effective at getting someone to express that discouragement, express that frustration. And once you've given them a chance to share that frustration and share those feelings, they will have a much better time listening to you. And so if you're trying to mobilize people to vote, if you're trying to get them to participate in the election, if you're trying to get them to support a progressive policy, it is always a good idea to spend time listening to them. I know we don't have a lot of time and it feels like, well, we don't have enough time to talk to everybody. And that's true. Sometimes a traditional canvas or a traditional phone bank is the way to go. But consider who are the people, what's the voter list where maybe you could launch a deep canvassing effort. Maybe you identify 4 of your leaders who are interested in deep canvassing, and maybe they have the deep canvas conversations while the other leaders do traditional canvassing. It's a great way to build relationships, recruit people, and like we said, it's a more effective strategy for unrooting bias.
Wow, thank you so much. That is all the time that we have for questions and answers. So I want to thank everybody so much. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to Carlos and Esty from Youth on Board for sharing their wisdom and their insightful, just deeply healing approach to deep canvassing. If you want to get more resources directly from Youth on Board, check out the link here. Unfortunately, you will have to copy down the URL. Apologies for the limitations of Zoom. But please go to that YouTube page to check out the other resources and videos they have that they created as a part of the Resistance School, a partnership with Harvard University and Leadership Lab. And as mentioned before, we will also share their tools and handouts that will help you get ready to deep canvas with your group. For example, how to write a script. Especially in this time of social distancing, we have to think of a new approach to the campaign work that we're used to doing in this time of year. The virtual phone bank that Andrew spoke about earlier are a great tool to use during this time of social distancing. So again, reach out, if you're a group leader, reach out to your organizer. If you're a group member, reach out to your group leader, get them excited about this idea so that you can start doing this work of really digging in with folks, especially while we're all stuck inside and have ample time to speak to each other over the phone and make connections with new strangers. The work can't stop just because we're inside. And this is a moment when we have time to support each other and really incorporate these listening partnerships into the debriefs after the activities that we do, and just get a really, really solid practice for how to support each other within the group and build the movement and build a community that we really want to see. Even if we don't know when we can start knocking doors again, we can still do the same kind of voter contact, the same work of building relationships and connecting with people in our communities, or even in places that we think are really, really important, that we want to reach out and support people. So thank you again for coming. Once again, all the materials, as well as all of the questions and answers from the chat box, will be sent around to everybody. Be safe, wash your hands, don't touch your face, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for coming to this webinar, and thank you for attending the April webinar series. We will see you next time. Bye, friends.